Hope is a discipline. Miriam Kaba. Hope is what keeps us choosing repair over revenge. It's the muscle when we decide to keep loving each other. We live in a world where harm meets punishment, where pain answers pain, where hurt people hurt people. But what if justice looked different? What if we actually knew how to repair what's been broken? This is What If, where we imagine the world as it could be and meet the people building it now. I'm Daydriane, and I'm glad you're here. Today we're asking, what if healing, rather than punishment, was our collective response to harm? Before we start, I want to define a few terms that you'll hear in this episode. Multiracial democracy, repair, and restorative justice. When we talk about a multiracial democracy, we mean a society where people of every background have real, equal power to shape the decisions that govern their lives, beyond just the right to vote. It means having resources and representation that actually work for everyone, not just a select few. Repair is the practical work of making things right. It's when communities take responsibility for past harm and rebuild trust by restoring what was taken or broken. Restorative justice is a process that centers the needs of those harmed, the accountability of those who caused harm, and the health of the community. So, what does it take to make this what if real? So today we have the honor of sitting down with Danielle Sered, the Executive Director of Common Justice, where she leads work to address violence in ways that advance racial equity, meet the needs of those harmed, and ultimately move us beyond incarceration. She's also the author of Until We Reckon, a book that's been recognized nationwide for challenging how we think about justice and repair. Danielle, I'd love to hear it in your own words. How do you introduce yourself and your work?
Thank you so much for having me. That introduction was perfect. We are people who have the enormous privilege of not only fighting against the things in the world that we know do harm, but to work in service of building the things that we want to see instead.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I want to start right where the work is most alive for you. As we look at the landscape of justice and repair right now, which is very rough, what feels most pressing or most urgent?
There's so much that is so pressing and so urgent. It's like drinking from a fire hose. I would name two main things if I had to shorten the list. One is just caring for the people at the intersection of the greatest challenges and repressions of our time, right? There are people for whom this is an extraordinarily difficult moment to watch, and there are people for whom it is an extraordinarily difficult moment to experience. And so I think very central for me, for the organization, but and for myself personally, too, are figuring out how to be in service of caring for and protecting the people facing the worst of what this moment has to offer. And then I think the other piece, kind of zooming out further for me, is about really understanding the intersection and interdependence of the criminal legal system and multiracial democracy. Understanding, I think it's easy for people to feel like the criminal legal system, a fair criminal legal system, is sort of nice to have, and that other things are more critical to have a multiracial democracy. And I think it's an enormous mistake. I think we know every time something is outlawed, it comes to the courts, we know, to determine whether or not it will be severely punished. Like, we are where movements go when they lose. There aren't different police for abortion or different police for teaching DEI in schools or different police for living a visible queer trans life. It's the police we know, it's the prosecutors we know, the judges we know, the jails, the prisons, the parole boards we know. And so we have to understand that the worst harms of these systems require that the criminal justice system enforce them. And so whether or not that system does that will have a huge impact on our chances of becoming and remaining a multiracial democracy. I think the stories about fear and who is dangerous, stories about who is dangerous, who is endangered, who should do the protecting, and how and why, are central to the formation or collapse of every democracy. And for too long, our movement has avoided the issue of violence. our opposition have not. And if we don't really take on the question of violence meaningfully, we will not only fail to end mass incarceration, we will not be able to protect multiracial democracy. And then I think the last piece of that is that part of how we take that on and part of how we protect it is that we put forward an affirmative vision for safety. I think our movement's done a great job of communicating really broadly how harmful jails and prisons can be to people. That is both really important communication and in some ways the least necessary. The study a few years ago by Forward.us found 1 in 2 Americans have had a loved one incarcerated. The harms of that system are widely known. They are widely known. The thing that is less known is what we can do instead. And so people don't just fight to have less of a bad thing. That's not what animates most people. What animates most people is fighting for a world they believe in, one that is aligned with their values, where they and their loved ones can have their needs met and potentially even thrive. And so I am obsessed with how we best convey our vision for a world in which people are safe at a time where the stakes for the uptake of that vision, I don't think, could be higher.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering, in doing the work that you do and holding both the reality of the harm and that vision or that possibility of something different, where do you draw from to keep your hope and your imagination intact, especially right now?
It's such a good question, and like I love it as a question. I mean, when I think about it, though, I think that it is not hardship that makes imagining hard.
Mm,
I think people in the worst circumstances imagine themselves out of it all the time. People did that in
yeah,
slavery. People do it in solitary confinement. Like, that's not what constrains imagination. Um, I do think that our failure to grieve what needs to be grieved constrains imagination. Like there is a sort of thing in us as people that we can only see as far into the future as we can look into the past. And if that looking into the past is unbearable, it means it foreshortens our ability to see forward. Like we can't imagine what is to come. And so we have to grieve. And
yeah,
so the good news is that we're a long way from eliminating hardship. So if eliminating hardship were required for imagination, we'd be fucked. Uh, we are not incapable of grieving, right? And like what's true for all of us is that all of us will suffer pain at different degrees based on luck and privilege and structure and all sorts of things. And the question of how we make it will have to do a great deal with how we grieve that, how we grieve it individually, how we grieve it collectively, whether or not we come together in it. I think New York City's failure to grieve the losses to COVID is responsible for a lot of the difficulties our city is undergoing that we have to grieve together. And that doesn't have to be a program. It doesn't have to be a therapist. Programs and therapists are great. I love many of them. But I think that when we take time to grieve together, I think it reopens our capacity to imagine.
yeah. That actually makes me think about the erasure of history that's happening right now
Uh-huh.
and how we're changing how we're talking about our history because people don't want to acknowledge or deal with those consequences. So, what are your feelings about that and how it relates to how we grieve?
I mean, I wrote a book called Until We Reckon, so my feelings are
Yeah.
pretty strong. Like, I don't think there is a way forward but by dealing with our past. And I think this
Yeah.
current political moment could not be a stronger argument for it. But I think the argument we are having as a nation, we had it in 1965 and we had it in 1865 and soaked the ground in blood. And we had it in 1619 and we kicked it off in 1492. Like there has been a long-standing question of whether America wants to be a multiracial democracy, and it
Mhm.
is not yet answered. It's some part of me is like, that's the only fight we're ever having. Like, that's always the fight. And so here we are in this moment where we are having very overtly, very explicitly the fight that has always been ours. And I do believe that there is not a way through the fight, but by telling the truth to and with one another and carving out pathways for repair. And so repair is neither just punishment. It is not the degradation and violence toward people who have caused harm or whose ancestors caused harm. But it is also not just apology, right? It's also not just a group of people being like, my bad or our bad, and us moving forward. It is repair, right? It's like, what could we do to make things as right as possible? Beginning from a shared assumption that we are going to continue to belong to each other and we are not going to all murder one another.
Mm.
Those are open questions for us, those two right now as a country, right? Like there are many people for whom those questions are asked and unanswered, right? But if we decide that we are going to continue to belong to each other, it's simply because we're not leaving, like enough of us aren't leaving. And if we decide that we are not all going to murder one another, which is so far where we're landing, then how do we move forward? And to me, there's not a way forward but through repair. And so I think there is something about the overtness of the conversations of this moment that is very honest.
Yeah.
And I like honesty. Like every good transformative process I've been in has started with people telling the truth. And so there is a ton of dishonesty about our history, right? There's the erasure you're talking about. The there's literally like pulling down websites that say true things, right? There's removing things from museums, but there is a broader honesty about the questions and intents of who we want to become, um, that has always needed to be named. And here it is, and here we are.
Yeah. Here we are. Um, I'd like to know, how has your thinking about responses to harm changed over the years? If you could talk to a younger you, a less experienced you at the very beginning of your career and your work, what would you tell yourself?
Um, so I think I understood well, um, the systems that cause harm and their failure to protect people, to heal people. I learned that as a kid. I learned it as someone who survived violence. I learned it as someone who committed violence. I learned it as someone who first came to understand the inequities of the criminal legal system, as someone who benefited from them as a white kid in ways the young Black kids I loved did not. So I don't think I was confused about that, which is a great gift. Like it's a great gift to not be confused from early. I benefited from incredible elders who taught me things I needed to know to understand my world, not just individually, but structurally, kind of to see through the matrix to how things
Mm,
operated. But I think that I, at the beginning of my career, overestimated how much it would help to be right.
mm,
Um, I thought if we were right, I thought we could do a lot through facts and persuasion. That
mm,
that data would help. I thought data would help. Data doesn't help. And I think about it like, particularly, data doesn't help in the face of fear. It doesn't help in the face of racism. It doesn't help in the face of fear. But when we are trying to use data to combat fear, like if my kid said he thought there was a monster under his bed, and I said, baby, there's a 98% chance there's not a monster under your bed,
mhm.
like nobody's sleeping.
Right.
It doesn't work. That
Yeah.
doesn't. Nobody's going to sleep that night. But if I'm like, baby, like, what do you know about this monster? Or is it angry or is it sad? Is it hungry? Does it want to eat you or just eat something? Like, oh, here's a special magic wand I made you that makes the monster chill out. Like if you start to actually inject curiosity, put people in relationship with someone else who will fight against the thing that scares them and get them
Mm,
into a different relationship. People sleep through the night. You don't combat fear by telling somebody they're stupid to be afraid, which is most of what I think our movement has done, to great, great detriment of where we could have otherwise succeeded. I think we have alienated ourselves from people who have experienced harm or feel like fear experiencing harm. And those are, in fact, the people who have the most stake in us doing things better, not the people who are worried that the harm that happens elsewhere might penetrate into their protected enclave, but the people who face day in, day out the threat or reality of violence. And I think we have failed to align with many of them by minimizing the reality of their fear, and treating it, frankly, as stupidity rather than as a legitimate emotion. And
mm,
so I think our movement has done that. And I thought in a lot of contexts that facts would work. And I don't think facts outweigh fear. I just don't think they win. I would never bet on them in a fight. And I also thought we could do a lot more to persuade people in the system. I thought if we provided beautiful facts, but also told beautiful stories, I knew we'd also have to move hearts and minds, that we tell beautiful stories accompanied with beautiful facts, and people's hearts would be changed and they would make different choices. And occasionally that happens. But what like a dear mentor taught me is that you don't win because you're right, you win because you're strong. And at the
Mm,
time he taught me that, it was bad news because we were right but not strong. So it was not a welcome insight when he shared.
yeah.
Um, but that I think I believed too much that individual actors with power and system had to be persuaded just as people. And I think that they do, but you have to also account for power, right? You have to organize, you have to understand how power operates on them and how their power operates, and you have to change their calculus of whether or not they risk their job by doing what you want them to do. Right.
Mm,
And for the people who want to do it, that means you provide them with sufficient protection that they are not going to become unemployed for doing the right thing. Because most of them want to do 10 good things. So they sort of figure if I do this one good thing and lose my job, those 9 good things don't get done. And so it's not worth it. And for those who don't want to do it, you have to put pressure on them. But what it means is you don't actually need to know their hearts, because what you have to do is you have to stand behind them and move forward. And if they're doing the right thing, then anyone who tries to come at them from behind will have to come through you. And if they are
mm,
not, they'll be stampeded, right? Like you need a group of people who are moving forward behind people with power who express in it, who can do things the same or differently. And so I think I really overestimated persuasion, specifically of system actors. I don't mean things like narrative and culture, but I mean of people in power. If that persuasion happens in the absence of like a real analysis about how power operates.
I also want to talk about how we can change our perspective of healing and what it looks like. Because I think a lot of us are taught that, if you're sad, go to therapy, take a walk, touch grass. It's like it's something you do by yourself because it's your problem. It's very individual and very personal. But a lot of communities carry wounds too, especially Black and Brown communities. So I want to know, what has collective healing looked like for you? What do you think it should look like in places that are impacted by systemic harm?
I mean, like I don't know anyone, I don't think, who's healed deeply alone. I
Mm,
know there is a deeply personal individual dimension of of collective healing, right? There's things you have to do in your own heart and your own body. There's like a dark place you go and no one else is there, right?
yeah.
And and you have to figure out how to move out of it. And sometimes you are
Hmm.
lucky enough that someone reaches down to you and pulls you up. That's
Yeah.
best case scenario, is someone just drags your behind up. Um, Sometimes you have to claw your way up until you are within reach of like their extended hand. So I don't mean there's nothing that is personal and solitary about healing, because trauma and loss, part of what they do is they feel as though they rip us from the fabric of our connection with one another, right? They
Yeah.
separate us, they isolate us. We are unprotected in those times. When we lose someone we love, we know we lose a relationship. Very concretely, it's made of separation, right? But healing is not that. Like healing is the process of finding a way to be woven back into the fabric of community, the fabric of relationship, the fabric of love. Um, and that means that it's always relational. It's always in context. It, at its best, is also historical, right?
Mm,
People are the people who help you most to heal are people who have healed, and they
yeah.
healed because the people before them healed too. Like they found a way. And one of the only reasons people believe they can heal is they see others who have. That is a historical move, right? Like there is everybody still standing is evidence of its possibility. It's like it's in that way it's a historical practice, it's a collective practice. And we don't do much of it by ourselves. It's never been individual. And like we heal together, we protect each other, we build power together. Um, we did this project, these brilliant researchers and people in our movement together did this project where we developed a scale to measure healing, because all of the healing measurements are are very diagnosis based and
Mm.
mostly quite weird. They're like, how many times in the last 30 days have you felt blue? Like,
Oh,
that's a question.
yeah.
What does what does that mean? Like, what is that
Right.
question? And all the other questions are equally weird. And they didn't work for us to measure our work because they didn't connect to the culture of our participants. Most of our participants who were men overstated how fine they were. Most people didn't want to be forthcoming about some of the things being asked. The most common response among people whose experience of violence has been minimized or made to seem unimportant culturally is to feel and express numbness. Numbness is actually one of the scariest symptoms of trauma, much worse than the ones that are feeling. Like if your foot hurts, that's not like if you're in an accident and your foot hurts, that is bad. And if your foot doesn't hurt,
Mm.
that is terrifying, right? Like then you're talking about paralysis. And the moment you feel pain in your foot is a moment of celebration, right? Because then you're like, we're still in it. Like I still have this
Yeah.
limb. I still have this part of my body. So, but numbness shows up as no, I don't feel that. I don't feel that. I don't feel that. Like you just kind of come through feeling fine. And so none of those measures worked. And so the project started with asking the question, like, what if instead of measuring the absence of trauma, we measured the presence of healing? And a group
Mm.
of people together over the last 5 years got together to talk first about what does healing look like? When you see healing, what does it look like? Like, what are you seeing? And the scale that emerged from it asked questions about people's ability, things like, I don't blame myself for what happened to me. What happened to me connects me to others instead of separating me from others. I believe I deserve to heal and can heal. I believe I deserve to ask for help. I am capable of feeling joy alongside my sorrow. Like those kinds of things. And those are the kind of things, like, unlike the other scales also didn't work if you went through multiple traumatic events or if while you were healing something else bad happened. They sort of assume there's one calamity, right?
Yeah.
And then they measure how you do coming through that calamity. That is almost no one's life. And it's certainly no one's life in communities that are oppressed in our country, right?
Yeah.
Nobody has one bad thing happen. And so, whereas healing, all those dimensions of healing can continue to grow and develop even as people experience additional like intervening harm. And so um I s- I think I think one of the things that emerged from the scale that relates to your question is how many of those markers of healing are relational, right? They're
Mm.
like, can you talk to people? Are you with people? Does this connect you to people? Do you laugh with people? Do you want to be with people?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
tell people all of this? And so I think those things are correlated to the reduction in trauma symptoms and all of it turns out. Like when we do the scientific part of the scale and do all the fancy validation things that are like gold standard research level, it turns out those things do correspond, which all of us, I
Mhm.
think, know in our lived experience and in our hearts.
Wow. I love that. What was the name of the study again?
We always just call it the healing scale. It is called the community scale for healing possibilities.
Okay. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So, we always close each episode with a what if, and so we'll end here. What if healing rather than punishment was our collective response to harm? What might that world feel like, look like, sound like?
What beautiful question. It's so far, right? That's such a far distance to imagine, right? I mean, I think one of the most central things is that it would feel like repair, right? It
Mm.
would feel like things that are broken can be mended. Like we could be less afraid we'll be hurt because healed people heal people, hurt people hurt people. If you interrupt those cycles, like the total amount of harm reduces. But even more than that, we would be less afraid of being hurt because like, we would be more certain that if we were hurt, we would come through it,
Yeah.
right? And so I think it would feel like belonging. And I think belonging is not just about feeling included, it's about feeling connected to a larger whole where what happens to you matters and changes the whole. And that also means what you do can change the whole.
Yeah.
Um, I think we have to always remember that high levels of violence aren't inevitable, that inequity creates violence, prison drives violence, that those are things we choose to do. They're policy choices. And we could do the opposite and live in a world mostly without it. Um, but I think most central to it to me is really what it would look like to have a culture of repair. Like, I think if we all think about a time that something was done to us and someone got away with it, we can think of a million examples. And if we think of a time someone did something to us or someone else and was punished, we can think of a million examples. And if we think of a time someone did something we believe to be wrong and repaired that harm, a lot of us come up with nothing. Or we come up with one little thing, especially if you exclude like a boyfriend in trouble bringing roses. Take that off the table and the list gets down to almost nothing. We don't have this muscle of repair
Yeah.
developed in our culture. And I don't think a body without a capacity for repair can survive. And I don't think a relationship without capacity for repair can survive. And I don't think a movement without capacity for repair can survive. And I don't think a nation without capacity for repair can survive. And so for all the urgencies of this moment, when you start off being like, what's the top of mind thing? There is so much we have to do to protect each other. But somewhere in that and alongside all this other fighting that we're doing, I think we have to build our muscle for repair, because I don't think long term that we make it without it.
Thank you, Danielle, for sharing your vision with us. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back next time with a new question and new answers.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is What If, a podcast by Common Futurists. What If is hosted and produced by me, Daydriane Chapman. Cover art is by Kat Janes. Music is by Sam Barsh and Luna Ray. For more What If content, follow us on Instagram at Common Futurists. The future starts in our imagination and in our inbox. Send your thoughts and dreams to whatif@commonfuture.co.